Today's guest, Dr. Charmaine Troy, is a tech and nonprofit founder, a first generation scholar and faculty member. She is the founder and CEO of First Gen Talks, a mobile app that leverages technology and coaching to advance financial literacy, scholar access, and college success. She is also the founder of Lift Ed, a nonprofit dedicated to expanding college readiness and economic mobility for first generation communities. In this episode, Dr. Troy shares the raw and powerful personal story of starting college with only $20 in her pocket and bouncing her very first check. A moment that revealed the massive gap between getting students ready to get through the door of college versus preparing them to stay. We unpack the scarcity mindset that so many first generation students carry with them and look at how it impacts college persistence in ways that many institutions completely miss. Dr. Troy also walks us through the four-part framework from her recent book, No One Told Me About Money, and challenges the higher ed status quo of treating financial literacy as a financial aid problem and solving it by providing information and one-time workshops. Having built and scaled first-gen programs at 3 R1 institutions, she breaks down what it actually looks like to move the needle on stopouts and student success. But before we dive into my conversation with Dr. Troy, take a moment to subscribe to the show to stay up to date on the latest and data-informed approaches to institutional impact. Welcome to Next Practices, Dr. Troy.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here, Katie.
Well, I'd love to start our conversation by you just sharing a little bit about yourself with our audience and your work in higher education.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Dr. Charmaine Troy. I am from rural North Carolina, born and raised in a small town called Lumberton, North Carolina. I went to undergrad at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I got my master's at North Carolina Central University, and I got my PhD at Morgan State University. The work that I've been in higher ed, I've been in higher ed now for about maybe 15 plus years. And I started doing work that was more focused on first generation student success back in 2016 at Georgia Gwinnett College. So I actually have created three different um, first gen student success programs at three different institutions so far. The first one being Georgia Gwinnett College, the second one at Virginia Tech, where I launched their first generation student programs, and the last being Georgia Tech, where I launched their first generation student initiatives program.
Amazing. First generation work is so challenging. I also, when I was in higher ed, centered a lot of my work on first generation, first year students specifically. I know that there are so many things we could talk about when it comes to first gen students, but I want to center our conversation today on the financial impacts of navigating college and the myth, the reality, and how
Mhm.
we as educators and institutions can do a better job of supporting our students through the financial aspect of the college experience. As we know,
Mhm.
the financial cost is high for many students, and navigating the financial realities can be the thing that prevents them from progressing and succeeding. In
Mhm.
our a prior conversation, you shared with me a little bit about your own experience as a first generation student and the financial impact. Do you mind sharing a little bit about your own story and take us back to what it revealed for you about the gap between students getting in the door and actually setting them up to stay and eventually graduate?
Absolutely. So when I was in high school, I was admitted to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Super excited. One of the things that I didn't really think about, I had focused a lot of my time on getting into the school, but I actually didn't focus a lot of time on staying in terms of financially, like finding scholarships and things of that nature, or preparing for my journey ahead. I didn't think about that, nor did, from coming from the family background that I came from, we didn't really discuss. how much money I needed to go to college with, because again, the focus was mostly on me being admitted. So when I got admitted, and I chose to go to a bridge program, it was called Summer Bridge, and it was in 1993. And when I went to Summer Bridge, I only had $20 in my pocket when I first got dropped off at Summer Bridge. Now, um, the the program was going to give me a stipend, but that was going to be about 2 weeks later where I had to wait for that stipend. So that $20 had to last me for 2 weeks. So while that moment was embarrassing looking back at it, but it was also revealing, of course, not necessarily because I wasn't financially ready, because I walked onto that campus admitted, enrolled, and in college. But what I did not understand was the financial systems that I was expected to navigate. My mom didn't understand that either. And so having that $20 in my pocket, I wouldn't call it irresponsible, but no one had never explained to me that I needed to prepare myself for the financial systems and the money that I needed to actually stay. So that experience actually taught me about access. Is this not the same thing as readiness? So while we spend a lot of time celebrating first gen students getting in the door, we do not ask that question about how do they stay. How do they, how do they manage their funds when they get a refund check? Because that refund check that I got 2 weeks later, I spent in probably a week, because I didn't at the time. I was thinking more from what I was uh, privy to or raised on, and that was well, not raised on, but just what I learned from my peers was that I wanted to look good. So I ended up getting clothes instead of really making that money stretch for the rest of the summer. Um, so again, going back to getting students in the door, again, we got to help them understand financial aid, emergency expenses, and saving, stretching their money, and the hidden costs of going to college.
100%. I think the access but not readiness is so interesting and poignant and true. So much of, I have a
Mhm,
daughter in high school right now, and so much of the focus, I think for everyone, is just getting to college. There's a
mhm,
focus on affordability and how I'll pay for it. But I think so much of it is really more about getting there. And then once you
mhm,
get there, you maybe have like the first year figured out. But as we know, colleges increase tuition year over year, expenses can shift. And like thinking
mhm,
about that long term viability is something that I don't think is at the forefront of many college students' minds, many parents' minds, of the counselors at the high schools who are coaching students on getting into
mhm.
college. It's something that's often overlooked. Um, I know that we've talked a lot about this idea or this concept of the scarcity mindset that many first generation students can carry with them in, like you were saying, they're more focused on appearances, often, want to fit in, want to belong because of their age, developmental age of many traditionally aged students, but even older students who are there, and want to still feel as though, older students, not even just first generation students, but even older students who come back can have some of those same challenges, but especially first generation students. Can you talk to me a little bit about how scarcity mindset can impact and shape a student long before they even set foot on campus, and how that mindset set might be showing up in ways that institutions aren't even recognizing, and how it impacts student outcomes in the long run?
Absolutely. So when we usually think about scarcity only as a lack of money, but for first generation students, scarcity can also be of lack of permission to dream bigger than what they have seen when they're coming from home. Some students are not just wondering, can I afford this? They're also wondering, is this kind of life that I'm trying to chase, this career that I'm trying to chase, is it even for me? Um, and that can show up in students under selecting in their opportunities. For example, they may not apply for competitive internships, fellowships, study abroad, leadership roles, graduate school, or high paying career paths because those opportunities may feel too far away from the world that they came from. And it's not that they lack the ambition, but also sometimes there are situations where they put thinking about the now in terms of, say, for example, if they are limited in funds at the time and they have to get another job or get a job on campus or send their money home to family members. If they're working a job, they're thinking about this money that's immediately right that they're getting right now, versus thinking about, well, maybe I should skip going to work to go to a networking mixer, and meeting potential employers, so I could think long term in the future and think about career paths, internships where they can make more money in the future versus that scarcity mindset that says, I need to get more money in my pocket right now. I can't afford to do this. Or I need to send money home to my family, or I need to go home and babysit my baby sister, and help my parents out. So I can't go to this or I can't participate in this. So that is taken away from broadening their opportunities and their leadership roles. I think there's also an emotional layer that institutions also miss. So for first gen students, like dreaming bigger can feel like leaving people behind. Um, they may wonder, if I succeed, will I become different from my family? Will they still understand me? Am I betraying where I'm coming from? Who gets to come with me if I move forward into these bigger, spaces? And so, why scarcity mindset is not just financial, it can be emotional, it can be generational. And it shapes how our students see money and opportunity and risk, and belonging.
Yeah, in your book, No One Told Me About Money, it outlines a four-part pathway for first gen financial confidence, to kind of address this, both the emotional and also actual physical, literal scarcity that students are experiencing. Can you walk us through your framework, and where do most institutions get stuck when they try to address financial stress amongst students?
Absolutely. So I have created what's called the First Gen Opportunity Pathway, and that is um, consists of four pieces, and it connects students directly to financial confidence because money is just rarely about. It's rarely just about money. It's about access, exposure, skills, opportunity, which ultimately lead to income. So the first part is the exposure. Um, Helping students see what's possible. So many first gen students are exposed to these careers and lifestyles and industries that they may have not seen in their families or their communities. So that exposure means giving students new experiences or giving them mentors, giving them opportunities to network, insights on industries that they've never been a part of. It gives them examples of what life can look like beyond just surviving. The second part is skill, helping students build their skills. So exposure to skills that build their confidence in a certain career, or career pathway. So that can include learning or practicing, earning certifications, developing their strengths, or even finding out what their strengths are, because a lot of students don't know what their strengths are. So a lot of colleges are leaning into doing strength finders so they can help the students identify that early. Understanding money and building professional and academic skills that allow students to compete, because it's a competitive market here. So it's not enough to tell students to dream big, but we also have to help them become prepared for these opportunities. The third part is opportunity, so opening the doors. The institutions, or this is where the institutions have a major responsibility. Um, our students need access to internships and jobs and leadership role and experiential learning like research, projects, shadowing experiences, to help them apply what they're learning. And so a lot of first gen students are talented, but without access, that doesn't always turn into mobility without the access. So opportunity is where preparation meets a door that someone actually opens, is what I have come to say for opportunity. And then finally, the fourth part is the last piece is the income. So helping students reach their goals, increase their earnings, build that financial stability and break income barriers. And for me, this is where financial confidence becomes really real. It's not just about budgeting better. It's about helping students understand how education connects to economic mobility and career choices, negotiating salary. And that can also go back to the scarcity mindset when students don't feel like they could ask for a certain salary, or they should take the first salary that they are offered. Think about wealth building and long term financial security. So I think where many institutions may get stuck is that they jump straight to information, or they might just do like a one time financial literacy workshop. But unfortunately, first gen financial confidence requires a full pathway, and it requires more than just one class. So students need to see what's possible. They need to see the build or to build the skills to pursue it. And they need to gain access to real opportunities and then translate that into income and stability.
Yeah, you've hit on such an interesting point that oftentimes institutions are focused on either like filling in some of the financial gaps, providing financial aid through scholarships, and even some institutions have moved towards
Hmm.
providing extra resources and support through food pantries or childcare, or they're trying to address that holistic student needs and fill in the gaps so that the student can focus on their college experience. But what they're missing are the
Hmm.
psychological skill exposure pieces of the students, even their ability to imagine what's available to them and that it applies to them and is something that they can access. And that's so powerful. I know
Hmm.
often when I sat across from students as an advisor and I worked primarily with students who had not selected their major. That was one of the things that I loved the most when I was working and worked with hundreds of students on this. Oftentimes, their ability to choose a major or career path was incredibly limited
Hmm.
by what career and professions they had had exposure to, and that they
Yes.
could not even begin to imagine the possibility of some career paths that weren't in their community or in their immediate
Hmm.
circles and family, and
Hmm.
felt almost an imposter syndrome around pursuing this pathway. So I think this is a really interesting way to be truly holistic and not just address the physical needs of students that financial challenge can present, but also the mindset, cultural, sociological impacts
Hmm.
that students might be experiencing just based on the communities and backgrounds and families they arrived from.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I know there's a tendency, as we were talking about it, you mentioned this, and like I want to dive a little deeper into higher ed's tendency to treat financial literacy as a financial aid problem, and
Hmm.
getting at this, that's something that a bursar's office or one-time workshop can solve. I want to
Hmm.
dive a little deeper into those parts of the challenge. What does the research and your experience say about why those approaches tend to not be enough?
Absolutely. That approach falls short because financial aid is only a piece. It's only a piece of the student's financial picture. Financial aid can help a student pay the bill, but it does not teach them how to manage the refund. It
Mhm.
does not explain how to stretch money across a semester. It does not help them decide whether to work more hours or to take more credits. It doesn't teach them how to handle credit cards, which I've heard a lot of stories about in terms of being exposed to credit cards for the first time and maxing a card out. I can attest to that myself. Family financial pressure, emergency expenses, um, transportation, food insecurity. That's a lot of that going around on campuses as well. And the shame that can come with not having enough. And so the research that financial stress affects more than a student's bank account is out there. and it shows how mental health and sense of belonging, academic performance, and integration into campus life is actually tied to that financial stress and how financial stress can impact performance, academic performance, when those needs are not being met. So financial stress, it can shape students' well-being and college experience in meaningful ways. Um, and there's also like perceived stress, and the relationship between financial strain and psychological symptoms and academic social integration. Because again, if a student's financial needs aren't being met, they're not thinking about their academics. That is like back burner if they are struggling financially, or they're not thinking about going out, hanging out with friends, missing that social piece because they can't afford it, or they may be ashamed. And so why I do not think financial literacy should sit only in financial aid. It should be a part of a bigger picture of student success, or the first year experience or the second year experience, career development, advising, family engagement, and persistent strategies that colleges come up with.
Yeah. As someone, as we talked about at the top of our conversation, built and scaled three first gen programs across big R1 institutions. What's the difference between an institution that gets it right and one that means well, but just isn't doing these taking these steps that you're recommending?
Absolutely. I think the institutions that get it right do these three things. Number one, they move programs from being just programs to ecosystems.
Mhm.
So they don't just create a first gen celebration week and call it support. They're actually building structure across advising, across financial aid, across career services, getting faculty engaged, student affairs, alumni, and also making sure that they are looking at the data to form these ecosystems. Secondly, I think that listening to students before they design solutions is very important as well. Doing student focus groups, um, they can learn a whole lot from students and pull data that way as well, especially when diving into their experiences. I think well-meaning institutions often assume that they know what first gen students need versus talking to the students, which is very important and very key. So asking the students what they are experiencing, where are they getting stuck, and what barriers that they are facing. Sometimes that can be kind of invisible in data. And then I would say third and finally, understanding that first gen support is an institutional strategy, um, that our students are resilient, first gen students are resilient, talented, and motivated, but resilient should not be the institution's retention plan. That should not be what they're focusing on, is that resilience piece. So I think the difference is whether the institution sees first gen students as students who need to be fixed, or whether it sees the institution as a system that needs to be redesigned to make success more easier to navigate for first gen students.
Yeah, that coordinated system is such a big difference than a one-time program done through one office that some
Hmm.
students may see and they may or may not know it applies to them, or shame may keep them from accessing the table or the event or participating in a really public event like that because they don't want to be identified as a student who needs to participate in that program. There's so many
Hmm.
limitations with that kind of one-off tabling event that they have on the quad that first week or whatever, however that manifests itself. I think thinking about it as a sustained, almost scaffolding is the word that was coming to mind as you were describing what institutions who get this right do well. I can just
Hmm.
imagine it really makes such a difference because it's integrating students with skills and
Hmm.
support versus having them self-select for information. I think that's really the big difference I'm seeing in what you're recommending.
Yeah, absolutely. And just thinking about um, something that you just mentioned, in students self-selecting, and the shame of not wanting to be identified. I have seen that. Some students have not wanted to, and I've just had it maybe once or maybe once, twice, at different institutions where maybe there's a student that's first gen that don't want other students to know that they're first gen or don't want them to know that they're low income, um, because of that I guess that shame of being identified as being a first gen or low income student or both. So it is very important that we make sure our students know that it's okay to self-identify. Um, and I always tell first gen students that is a identity to be proud of, and so not to hide. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. I come from first gen low income family, and
Same,
you can accomplish so much
so much.
and lift so many boats from it, and something to really be
Yes,
truly proud of. Hmm.
yes, absolutely. So
Hmm.
I'm really proud of the first gen mentors that I've had in the past, at every school actually. Um, that have really shown or been a fantastic example for students to follow, just to see how well they've done, and when they connect with these students and let them know where they've come from and where they can be, and how well they're doing, and these students can see it. I think that's a fantastic example.
If you had a magic wand and you could sit down with any provost or, you know, VP that touches this piece of the student experience, who's looking at their stop out data and trying to figure out what's driving it, what's the one thing you'd want them to understand that the data probably isn't telling them?
Mm. I would probably tell them that their data may show when a student left, but it may not show them when the student started to leave.
Mm,
Um, a student does not usually stop out in one moment. That's something that's gradual. They stop out when the refund is delayed, or when they can't afford a textbook, or when they have to pick up extra shifts and start missing class. When they're embarrassed about a balance, when they do not understand what a hold is, or like I mentioned before, supporting family back home. When they feel like everyone else knows how college works except them, and they don't feel like they fit in that particular college environment. So by the time a student officially leaves, the institution may see a registration gap or unpaid balance, but underneath all of that is often a chain there of small financial, emotional, and informational breakdowns, um, in communication with the student and the institution. So the stop out issue is again a significant issue. Um, and so while the National Student Clearing Research Center is reporting that some college students um, are not attend or they're attending college, but they've left without earning a credential. You see, thousands of students going through that issue. Um, that should make make institutions ask, why did they leave? But what did we fail to notice while they were still here? And so the one thing I would want a provost or PSA to understand is that financial stress is something that's often an early warning sign. It's not something um, that is a side issue. And so if we want to understand persistence, you have to understand that the student's financial reality, you have to understand their financial reality before it becomes an academic outcome.
yeah, absolutely. It doesn't tell the full story. It can tell us one component of the story, but this is a
Hmm.
gradual process. It's full of many little moments, and being able to see those moments as soon as possible and act on them and provide support earlier is
Hmm.
critical to making a difference. Well, Dr. Troy, where can our listeners find your book? Where they find out more about you and connect with you if they have questions or want to learn more about your work?
Absolutely. So the book, No One Told Me About Money, Building Financial Confidence as a First Generation Student. You can find that on Amazon. You can also find it at Egram Sparks on their website as well, if you want to do bulk orders. Or single book orders as well. And you can find me. I am on IG at Dr. Troy, at Dr. Charmaine Troy, just one word. You can also find me on LinkedIn as well.
Thank you so much for joining me to talk about this really important topic of empowering our students with financial, not just financial literacy, but with financial know-how, really. I
Mm,
really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you too, Katie. Thank you so much.